Welcome everybody to this session on the impact of Iran's regional strategy on Gulf security. My name is Rob Singh. I'm Professor of Politics at Birkbeck, the University of London, and we have a very distinguished panel of guests to tackle this very timely and controversial topic. We have Norman Roule, who's former National Intelligence Manager for Iran at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in the United States. We have Major General Dr. Ilan Berman, former Deputy National Security.
Thanks for the promotion, full colonel. That's okay.
Oh, I wasn't clear whether you were Colonel or you were Major General, so I'm going to demote you straight away.
I'm full of a full colonel, yet to be determined full of what?
Eran was former Deputy National Security Advisor for the State of Israel. And we've got Ilan Berman, who's Senior Vice President at the American Foreign Policy Council in Washington, DC, and has just got back from a trip to the region. So we're very, very glad to have them. And thanks to Barak for organizing this panel and for inviting everybody to participate. Clearly, as we've been learning this morning, the region is in a state of flux, nothing new there, but Iran in particular has been the subject of quite dramatic switches in terms of US policy, from the Obama administration essentially trying to normalize it and make it a responsible stakeholder, to the policy of maximum pressure under Donald Trump's administration, and now to what some see as, under Joe Biden, Obama light, or one might say Obama heavy, in view of recent rumors about the direction of the new nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which seems to be even lighter and more problematic than the 2015 deal looks to be, in terms of Biden, so the rumors have it, now looking to Tehran to assist on energy after the Ukraine invasion by Russia, and in view of the continued tensions, not just towards Iran from other actors within and outside the region, but also intra tensions within that bloc, not least the GCC. So I thought we might kick off inviting our distinguished guests just to give 5 minutes each as an overview of this topic, and in particular if they could perhaps set out their views on what Iran's regional strategy actually is, how successful they think it's currently being in terms of its impact on Gulf security, and then perhaps what, if anything, can feasibly be done to counter it. So perhaps if we begin with Norman.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and the pleasure of being with such distinguished and old friends on today's panel. Iran's regional plans are nested within its overall strategic ambitions. This is similar to the strategy of most aggressive revisionist actors to seek to exploit multipolar environments, and indeed will be similar to those of Russia if you're looking in that paradigm. Iran's first goal is to reshape the international dynamic in a way that allows it to normalize international tolerance for its aggression and power projection. Second, Iran seeks to assert influence over the countries in its near abroad and redefine the regional power architecture in its favor so that it can shape events with minimal requirements on its system. Next, it seeks to reduce Western influence in general, but especially the ability of the United States to undermine Iranian ambitions or to shape regional activities. Fourth, they would seek to minimize risks to regime stability during a period of transition to a new generation of hardline leadership, which remains underway and will last for some years. Also, they seek to prevent the formation of multilateral political and economic coalitions. This has been a long-standing effort of Iran, and indeed is one of the drivers for its involvement in the JCPOA talks. And last, they seek to build an economy that is capable of withstanding future international sanctions campaign and is woven into the architecture of various economic structures so that it is seen as a player that can't be removed without some difficulty. So how is this playing out? Well, On the ground, Tehran has sought and will continue to seek first diplomatic recognition for a hardline and bloody regime. The likely Iran nuclear deal will facilitate this process. Talks among some of the regional actors have established communications channels, but the talks remain sterile. Iran has made no compromises. It's not showing that it wishes to be a responsible actor so much as it wishes to be an assertive actor. Relations in the region are warmest with Qatar. This has long been driven by their shared gas field and Doha's willingness to engage the regime robustly on behalf of the Biden administration. Next, Iran will seek trade deals and foreign investment, both to normalize economic relations and to encourage others to engage in commercial and financial activities with Iran at a time when foreign direct investment in the region is highly competitive. Iran will have great difficulty competing here, but will tout the success of this. Iran has made no compromise on its regional ambitions. It seeks to retain the ability to influence the crucial Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandab, and through that, the Suez Canal. And I think this needs some expansion because the capacity to influence these three straits, these three choke points of international commerce, gives it an ability to control a tremendous percentage of global trade as well as global energy. In coming months and in a few years, Iran will also seek to transition its militias to political actors akin to Hezbollah. Iran is unable to export efficiency or good governance. It doesn't have that to export, but it does export a capacity to create actors which are able to control the security and dominate the government in what many call the axis of misery. I think the region is responding by attempts to lower the temperature with Iran, engage Iran when possible, but this is difficult. Because Iran senses international weakness or an international lack of attention to the region. And it's unlikely that Iran is going to become a productive or non-threatening partner in the near term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norman. That was a tremendously concise and comprehensive take on this. Ilan, would you like to offer your view?
I'd be happy to. And let me preface this by saying I think Norman has it exactly right in terms of providing the broad overview. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I think what's necessary to talk about here is the economics of the strategic thinking that underpins what Iran is doing. And in order to do that, we have to put it in the context of what's happening globally, both in terms of the renewed negotiations with Iran over, not over a new agreement, although I know some people will talk about it as being a qualitatively new agreement, but it has many of the strains of the 2015 nuclear deal concluded by the Obama administration, but also against the backdrop of what's unfolding in Eastern Europe and what it's doing to global energy markets and how that affects Iran as a major energy producer. So I think the bottom line up front here is that when we're anticipating Iranian regional behavior, the past can serve as sort of a prologue of what we can expect. And to do that, we have to review history a little bit. In 2015, the agreement that was ultimately concluded by the United States and the other P5+1 nations was tactical in nature, in the sense that it only provided temporary curbs on Iranian nuclear development. And by the way, parenthetically, most of those, the balance of those have expired already. So what we're talking about is a law of diminishing returns that kicks in very quickly in terms of the timescale that we're looking at with any new agreement. But the benefits that Iran received as a result of signing on the dotted line were strategic in nature. It was massive sanctions relief. And I think it bears honing in on that point, because I think people don't quite understand the scale of the sanctions relief relative to the Iranian budget. So in 2014, the annual GDP of Iran was $415 billion. The sanctions relief that Iran received, both directly and indirectly as a result of the 2015 JCPOA, was upwards of $100 billion. So for, at least as seen from Tehran, this was an enormous windfall. And we saw precisely what happened in the aftermath of the signing of the JCPOA. We saw a very sizable expansion of the Iranian defense budget. We saw a flow of additional funding to proxies. both in neighboring Iraq, but also Hezbollah in Lebanon, also Palestinian rejectionist groups. And we saw an acceleration of strategic programs, including their work on ballistic missile systems, which were not in the scope of work of the 2015 JCPOA, and also, for example, parallel programs like their space launch program, right, which can be married at a point later in the future, can be married with their nuclear program and their ballistic missile program. So if we fast forward 6-7 years, we're in very much the same situation today. As the Biden administration is involved in these negotiations, as it is anticipating an imminent return to some sort of framework to govern Iran's nuclear ambitions temporarily, we have to understand that even before JCPOA 2.0 or JCPOA minus or whatever you call it, the Iranians are already today experiencing an unprecedented windfall. Just to sort of to quantify this for you, Iran's budget for 2022, 2023 is based almost entirely on selling what they estimate to be 1.2 million barrels of crude oil a day at a price of $60 per barrel. Now, I'm in Washington. It's early here. I didn't check the markets before I logged onto the Zoom, but at close of business last night, Brent crude was trading at $131 a barrel. Right, and Iran claims to be selling 1.5 million barrels currently, with a scale-up option to 3.5-4 million barrels per day. Right, so in other words, Iran already, even before the conclusion of any agreement, has more than double its anticipated resources and revenue that it can throw at its regional strategy, that it can sort of use to animate its regional strategy. And if the deal is concluded, as it's likely to be on balance, we're going to see much more in the same vein. Already, the Biden administration has promised dozens of billions of dollars of direct sanctions relief. We're seeing already indirect sanctions relief in the form of lapsed enforcement of existing American sanctions, which has allowed consumers like China to purchase greater amounts of Iranian crude than they were before. Sort of that elephant in the room, which I talked about earlier, is Iran's ability to very rapidly scale up its energy production, right? The estimates vary, but somewhere between 3 months, 4 months to 6 months from now, they could be pumping at double the rate that they're pumping currently. And with the global price of oil very high as a result of instability resulting from Russia's aggression against Ukraine, what you're seeing is an Iranian regime which, as a result of the previous administration's maximum pressure approach, had really seen its resources drawn down, had really seen its foreign exchange reserves drawn down, its economic base depleted. It is now sitting much prettier, and it may be in a much more advantageous economic position, even if we don't conclude a second JCPOA. But if we do, that will only accrue to the benefit of the Iranian regime. So I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Ilan. That was great to get that economic take. It's very striking. I think, as you say, people don't necessarily appreciate the magnitude of what's going on there. Colonel Lerman, would you like to offer your impression?
I'm just thinking to myself that Norman and Ebtesam have this benefit that their names cannot easily be mistaken for the name of our subject. But I'm glad that Norman mentioned the Russian equivalent, because I was actually about to crib on George F. Kennan and talk about the sources of Iranian conduct. And indeed, we need to speak here about two layers of Iranian level, or two levels of Iranian threat to the interests of others in the Gulf and beyond. There are those which flow from Iran's geostrategic position and its history. The Arab tensions with the Persians or the Ajamis go back centuries and or more. Even the name of the Gulf is disputed, and the possession of the three islands is a story that goes back to the days of the Shah. The dispossession of the UAE goes back to the days of the Shah. So there is a layer there which is not dependent on the ideological orientation of the regime in Tehran, but what makes Iran truly dangerous, and what makes what Ilan has just described extremely dangerous, is the fact that this remains not just a state driven by raison d'etat, but a revolution driven by raison de révolution. And I think we've been having this conversation, both sides of the water, for the better part of 40 years now. What is the ultimate key to the analysis of Iranian behavior? And I think one of the most profound aspects is that ultimately it is a revolution that has failed its own people, that has not, despite all that Ilan describes, has nevertheless delivered after 40 years a country which was 4 times or 3 times richer than Turkey. This equivalent population, so GDP ends up being much the same in proportion. Was several times richer than Turkey, is now several times poorer than Turkey, and many in Iran know that. And so the drive, the ever-expanding drive of the revolution, of the quest for self-justification of the revolution, makes it even more dangerous because of that. And so we see of course, we do see the use of proxies. We see the direct challenge to the viability and survivability of the existing order in the Gulf. I think Bahrain is in a particular point of tension given its confessional makeup, but practically every regime in the Gulf, even if the Qataris have been trying to buy off or to feed the crocodile, to use Churchill's phrase, are essentially delegitimized by the very nature of the Iranian regime. And the more recent evolution of the system of proxies and the manner in which it is being used, as we saw in the attack on the UAE recently, has made it even more, I think, acute. It's not as if they are not vulnerable. I think a key question in terms of Iranian strategy in the Gulf and beyond the Gulf is whether or not dominance in Baghdad can be wrested away from Tehran. And so the invitation of Kadami to the Summit of Democracies may have raised some eyebrows here and there, but it was an attempt, I believe, to basically see if Iraq can be drawn out of the Iranian orbit. I would say this very carefully, and I'm not an advocate of the Biden administration. My impression is that the distinction here is that whatever they are willing to offer now is driven by specific circumstances. Ironically, it may now be the Russians who would fail the talks in Vienna for, how shall I put it, for very crude reasons. But this is not an administration, to the best of my judgment, enticed by the notion that Iran is about to cease to be an adversary, an enemy. This is still an adversarial relationship. And so the question is not just what is going to happen in Vienna at the end of the day, but what are we going to do if there is an agreement, which we all know is essentially an interim agreement, winning us at best 2 or 3 years for the security of the Gulf and the security of the region. And here I would say that since Israel, and I'm speaking from an Israeli perspective here, since Israel and the Gulf states now find themselves very much in the same predicament, what we are doing, for example, the campaign between the wars in the Syrian context has become very relevant also to the manner in which Gulf security needs to be handled in this age of proxies. And I think I'll stop here.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Eran. And I'll invite Dr. Al-Ketbi, who was stuck on a previous panel and at risk of inviting her to repeat herself on this one. Dr. Al-Ketbi is founder and president of the Emirates Policy Center. So I wondered if you could just give us, if you may, a quick summary of your take on how effective you think Iran's current strategy is in relation to the Gulf, and what can and should be done in response.
Thank you. First, I would like to talk about the Iranian calculation here. From 1979 until present day, the Iranian regime is yet to finalize its option for a long-term strategy or reveal a coherent strategy because of the contradictions within the regime, as well as the duality of decision-making within the regime. Now, we can see this in their economic model, which is a hybrid between of Western liberalism, Eastern socialism, and having elements of an Islamic economic model. This can also be seen in their relation with the global powers. They are not leaning fully to the West or to the East. So Rice's election represents the first sign in a while that all three branches of power in Iran are controlled by the conservative movement in Iran, and it represents the sidelining of the moderate, reformist, and other opposition voices within policy making circles. However, after sidelining the moderate, signs of a split has emerged in the regime between the government and more hard line elements of the conservative movement in the deep state. And this can be seen more clearly in the regime's strategy in the regional and nuclear fights. So regionally, there are two main indicators that drive Iran regional policy. First, the Iranian regime gives the priority to dealing with the axis of resistance over its neighbors, and it gives a priority to geographic neighbors rather than other international actors. Through political realism and understanding the need to open up some breathing space for the Iranian economy, Brahim Raisi claims that his government's priority is to mend the rift with Iran GCC's neighbors. But however, this policy faces resistance from hardliners in the deep state. However, also this does not mean that Iran will stop supporting the axis of resistance. Rather than it will continue prioritizing its relation with its proxies over its relations with the neighbor states. So now, for example, the Iranian government alleges that it wants to raise trade with the UAE to $3 billion US dollar. However, earlier in this year, we saw attack by the Houthis on UAE, and this indication of the rift between the government and the deep state. And when we saw that Kihan, which belonged to the hardliner, the IRGC, admiring what Houthi did. So worth noting that this priority will be clearer if sanctions are lifted. Iran is likely to provide more aid to its proxies. On the global level, the Iranian government says it will give a priority to its immediate geographic area over other secondary global actors. This does not include, of course, the main powers. Now we are talking about Europe, US, China, Russia, or even India. So Iran claims that when we talk about its missile program, it's not negotiable. So, but it's the Iranians saying that they are willing to negotiate the regional program under the condition that they want to read. They are willing to talk about economic cooperation, but they are not willing to give anything vis-a-vis that. They want to take, not to give. So there is an atmosphere of pessimism regarding the Vienna talk after Baqiri returned from Vienna, the successful launch of an Iranian satellite and the pessimistic statements from players in the negotiation. So the rift within the conservative decision-making circle is also evident in the nuclear file. Now, it seems that Raisi and his government are pushing for a deal. And I saw in Munich Security Conference, Abdullahian shows that they want that deal and they are willing to have that deal. But while the more hardline elements are pushing to maintain the gains from Iran's 5-step of nuclear escalation until they receive benefits from these steps. So it seems that the predominant positioning in the Iranian regime is towards maintaining a nuclear threshold status, and this is more beneficial for them. They can blackmail everybody. If they gave this up, what do they will blackmail the others? Yes, their proxies, they can do. So finally, after the elimination of moderate reformist party from policy-making circles, there does not seem to be an appetite for forming political or large economic relations with the West. And the regime is looking to implement its look to the East policy. But however, the regime is split between a pro-China and pro-Russia camp. Figures with geo-economic priorities are leaning towards China, while those from the political and security elite with geo-political priorities lean towards Russia. At the moment, and I will conclude with this, Iran is not taking a clear stance regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It had previously supported Russia against what is perceived to be a threat from NATO. However, it seems that they have taken a step back and were absent from voting against Russian action in the UN General Assembly. This could be seen as a pressure tactic after Russia voted to designate the Houthi as a terrorist organization. But however, we should understand that Russia has enough influence to bring Iran in line with the Russian stance. And I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ketbi. Can I just open this up then? If any of the participants want to send a message or a question via chat, please feel free to do so. The tenor of the discussion so far has been, in a way, deeply negative. We still don't know whether Iran is a nation or a cause. We are back to a position of deja vu all over again in terms of the JCPOA. The Biden administration is clearly not going to take any congressional oversight and seems to be arguing it's not a new deal, so it doesn't need any new approval. The US is overmatched in terms of Iran's missile capacities in the region, and pressures from Asia for oil and LNG supplies are creating another opportunity for Iran to benefit. Would that be a correct summation in your view? And if so, are we in Europe and the US on a hiding to nothing in terms of reaching out to Tehran? What would your take on that be, Norman?
Great questions. I'll focus on one element. You mentioned the issue of whether that Iran must decide whether it is a nation, a country, or cause. The paraphrase from Henry Kissinger's famous statement. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is that we can't decide whether it's a country or a cause. And because we have different views within the West and the international community and even the region, you have these competing processes of engagement and confrontation, which whiplash back and forth, changing depending upon if you feel you're under threat by Iran, Israel, or if you're not. If you're in the UK or the United States, the threat is a lot farther away and engagement seems more reasonable. I think the absence of a coherent Iran strategy in the international community, and I've now been working this issue for almost 40 years, I'm unable to identify an Iran strategy in the United States or in the international community beyond, are you for or against JCPOA? And because of that, I think Iran has a lot of space in which it can work in this dynamic.
What do you think that a coherent Iran strategy might look like?
Well, the nuclear issue is, of course, important, but one can make a case that Iran will never, and Israel disagree with this, and some in Washington, Iran, there are drivers to say that Iran doesn't need a nuclear weapon. If it just stays close to a nuclear weapon, it gets most of the benefits and can hold a deal up as a shield to pressures against anything else, and in essence can achieve most of its regional ambitions. It's only its external threats that it does, such as the United States and the West larger powers, it must deal with. But again, others will have different views on that. But beyond that, unless you contain Iran regionally, unless you contain a deal with Iran's power projection capacity, you're not able to actually enable a debate within the regime between the pragmatic conservatives and the hardline conservatives as to the direction of the regime. One can make a case that support for JCPOA actually enables the most hardline factions in Iran. And instead, what you need to do is to have this contained structure where you in essence have a situation where the Iranian people are allowed to eventually choose the course of their own government. And one footnote here, the issue of Iran's people and their choice is also a political football in the West. About 18 million Iranians voted for Raisi, the most bloodthirsty political actor since the revolution, first revolutionary government. And within the US, we have this quiet debate on it's okay to sanction Russian people for the action of Putin, even though most of the Russian military didn't know what it was doing. But it's a problem if you sanction the Iranian people for the action of the Revolutionary Guard. 18 million Iranians voted for Ebrahim Raisi.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Ilan, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, just a couple of thoughts. I think I didn't see much to disagree with in terms of what Norman said. I would just sort of clarify a couple of points. First of all, I think to my original comments, the discussion about the JCPOA being a tactical agreement that conferred strategic benefits. I think this is precisely the dangerous dynamic that we want to avoid, right? We can have a debate about whether JCPOA 2.0 is a good idea or a bad idea. Personally, I think it's a bad idea. But to me, the sort of where the agreement stands or falls is whether or not it is generous enough to empower Iran's worst instincts, which the 2015 agreement was, because it conferred so much direct economic assistance to the Iranian economy. Any deal that is concluded by the Biden administration or others is going to be measured against whether or not it makes the Iranian regime act more responsibly or act more aggressively, more like a country or more like a cause, right? If we're going to sort of use that trope again and again. The other point that I would riff off of is I think Norman's right. I think there's not a lot of creative thinking that is going on either in Washington or in Western capitals about Iranian strategy. And the thinking that is being done is almost uniformly an outside-in strategy. It is a strategy that envisions the Iranian regime as a monolith, as a consolidated entity, doesn't really take into account the different political strains within the regime and the levers that exist within the country. I would just note three trends that I think are enormously consequential here and have the ability to shape Iran, not from without, but from within, right? The first is what you're seeing and Raisi's election, as Dr. Al-Ketbi talked about, is I think very much a reaction to this, is a decline of clerical authority, right? And that has to do with demographics, that has to do with declining living standards among ordinary Iranians. But the Iranian regime has a crisis of credibility. And I mean, I understand, right? Raisi was elected because the supreme leader is becoming long in the tooth. He's looking for a successor. That obviously plays a part. But a not unconsequential factor here is that less and less Iranians are tuning into what the clerics are saying. And so you're seeing the clerics begin to shift their strategy. I would point out there was a great study done recently by the Tony Blair Institute in London about the rise of the Imam Khatibs, right? The rise of these indoctrinated technocrats from, I'm sorry, Imam Sadegs, from Imam Sadegh University in Tehran, because it was very much a response to precisely this trend that I'm talking about, a sense among ordinary Iranians that the regime is out of touch. The regime needs to to be more responsive to the people. So the Iranian regime is not a monolith, but it is adapting and it is changing. And there's a couple of other things that you're seeing that are also enormously consequential. The first is the rise of environmental concerns as a real wedge issue in Iranian society, right? Drought, mismanagement, ecological, desertification, things like that. These are things that are bringing Iranians of all economic strata together in a way that simply wasn't there a decade ago. And it's something that a evolved Western strategy could potentially message on, right, exploit, could talk to the Iranians about in a way that we haven't been before. And the third is that because of all the foregoing, you're seeing at least somewhat a coalescence of Iranian opposition factors. And again, right, these are enormously impassioned opposition groups and individuals and figures, and they tend to fight with each other as much or more than they do fight with the regime. But the intellectual shift that you've seen in recent years, where in the the rise of the Green Movement, we were still talking about behavioral modification, a modification of the existing regime to behave better, to behave more like a country, less like a cause. That's not what Iranian opposition figures are talking about now. They're talking about a fundamental rejection of the regime and a sense that the regime is a consolidated intellectual entity and it's unreformable, right? And all these factors, I think, have a tremendous bearing on how we Westerners should think about Iran and approaching Iran, right? Because it's a country in motion in a very real sense.
Thanks, Ilan. Those are really excellent points to keep in mind. Eran, did you want to respond on this?
I want to come in on this debate saying that there's a contradiction inherent in the situation, in the sense that the real solution for the challenge that the present regime poses to regional stability, to global stability, let's not forget, if they break to the bomb, that's the end of the NPT system worldwide, regionally for sure, but probably also worldwide. People are now scratching their heads about the lessons of the Ukrainian decision not to hold on to what was on their territory. And if Iran breaks through, I can envision anything from, forgive me, from not Turkey and Egypt and Saudi Arabia need not even be mentioned, but I'm thinking Indonesia and Vietnam and others drawing an irretrievable lesson. Mearsheimer's wet dream of a 20, 25, 30 nation nuclear nation world, which he thought would be more stable, I doubt it, may come true very quickly. So the real solution to this challenge lies exactly where Ilan described it, in the transformation of this regime into a status quo power, which could draw on the huge inherent energies of the Iranian people to bring it back into the world, take it in the direction that others in the region have beneficially taken. But this is an extremely non-linear proposition. We don't, even if we work for it very hard, we don't know how many quarters will go into the machine before the counter-revolution pops out. And we cannot plan on that basis. We must plan for this, but we cannot plan on that basis, because the timeline for the nuclear project and the progression of proxy subversion across the region is already ongoing. And therefore, we need a strategy that takes both elements in mind. It is very important. And this is going to be crucial for the debate that may ensue stateside and elsewhere in the wake of a JCPOA 2, if it does happen, not to be drawn into rationalizations that legitimize the regime. I think the most grievous fault of the Obama administration was letting the Green Revolution 2009 die without taking, for the very purpose of making Tehran an interlocutor on the bomb, which was Obama's priority. This really must not and need not happen again, given that we are dealing here with Raisi and not with some fantasy Khatemi-like or Rouhani-like proposition. And it also requires greatly, and I think this should be the very clear common agenda of the Gulf, Israel, and others across the region. It should entail a significant investment by the West collectively, and not just saying the states, in strengthening and building up the capacity of the powers of stability across the region to resist Iranian subversion, to counter the impact of more money to the and means to the proxies, and to basically seek the defeat or at least the containment of the proxies region-wide. And I would mention in this context one new element, in the sense of the last year or so, is that now the US, Israel, and the Gulf states now work in close coordination via the fact that Israel now is in CENTCOM. And if there's a military dimension to this challenge, it can be much better coordinated in terms of response, in terms of contingency planning, in terms of training, exercises, sharing technology, sharing intelligence than ever before.
Thank you very much, Eran. May I just open this up to the participants? Does anybody have a question for the panel that they'd like to put forward?
No, we haven't heard Ebtesam on this crucial matter.
I'll just see if there's no one's got a question. Well, let me then take up that with Ebtesam, and if anybody else wants to jump in on this as well. Where does that leave the Gulf states in relation to the US and Europe? Because clearly, you know, we've seen huge tensions still among the GCC, not least the blockade of Qatar until 21. At the same time, we've seen the US basically rewarding Qatar, making it a major non-NATO ally in January, going to it to ask for help on natural gas supplies to Europe, which it didn't really get, but nonetheless, there are tensions within that relationship there. But are we just left with basically going back to as many of the GCC, including Qatar and Saudi Arabia, as we can in order to counter Iran?
Well, allow me just to add one thing regarding the regime in Iran. We published a very good book. We call it The Republic of the Guard, and it's unique. It's about IRGC, and it's on Amazon now. So in that, it's the structure. It's not only the structure, but mainly now, Iran is in the heart of that guard, even more powerful than Khamenei. It's an economic power, it's political power, it's military power. It's more powerful than the army itself with its budget. So when you are talking about the regime, we are not talking about Raisi. they are more weaker than others vis-a-vis the guards and the IRGC and the upper hand for IRGC. So when we thinking about how to deal with Iran, and this deal will rehabilitate the Iranian regional activities and making Iran behaving as a responsible actor, respecting the international order, international law. We saw this since 2015. Iran did not. Okay, even without Trump provoking that, right? Iran did not. And we saw when Netanyahu showed us all these CDs that Iranians were developing and enriching their nuclear capability. So if we are wishing, this is wishful thinking that Iran is going to change IRGC and layers of prestige about 4 million inside Iranian society. So thinking about that, any change is coming from within, it will take ages. So we have to deal with the reality. This is the group, ruthless. We have to deal with them, how to deal with them. Now, coming back to your question, US tried to work with GCC as a monolithic, but it did not succeed to bring them together. Okay, fine. Let them announcing that Qatar is the NATO ally, but we are talking about that they wanted from Qatar to supply Europe with gas. But we all know that how long it takes the infrastructure, the pipelines to go. It takes about 3 years. So nothing will substitute the Russian gas in this crisis now. Even if you left the sanction from the Iranian, talking about Iranian that they are be willing, we had a webinar in our institute yesterday. And in 2 days, we have one on the international level. We are discussing Ukraine crisis and one on regional level. And we had both on the first and the second oil and economist oil experts. And both of them said Iran cannot substitute the Russian oil. It needs 5 years. And this is from an Iranian expert I met, 5 years. Their infrastructure cannot bomb that oil barrels in the market. So lifting the sanction or whatever, thinking that Iran will help the West vis-a-vis Russia, I think this is wishful thinking. Now, coming back to GCC, unfortunately, GCC, they don't view Iran as the threat for them all. But their policies regarding Iran is not the same. Even when we tried in UAE to have rapprochement with Iran, Saudi tried. The Iranian did not stop their bad behavior, okay? They wanted to show us, okay, that, okay, we can send Houthi if you are going to have, you are a step back from Yemen, and if you are going to have a talk with the Israeli, okay, you have to stop that, okay. They wanted to stop the Abrahamic Accord. So who is going to cooperate, I would say? Emirati, Saudi, and Bahraini with Israel. Those whom can, they cooperate together in front of Iran.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm conscious we're running out of time, so I just wanted to give.
My apology also. I have to leave. I have another commitment outside the office. Thank you so much.
You're in great popularity today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just give everybody else the 3 panels just a quick 1-2 minute summary. Where do you think things are going in the short term over the next, let's say, 2 years, as far as Gulf security is concerned? Norman, would you like to start?
I think we're going to see more of the same, maybe a little more of the same. Iran's economy will certainly receive a massive injection of capital following any nuclear deal. The amount of money it will spend on its proxies will be, in real terms, quite small, but in meaningful terms, quite large. It doesn't take a lot of money to fund proxies. I think the biggest wild card that we should consider is what happens if the Safir, the ship off of Yemen, explodes? What happens if an Iranian drone strikes a large cargo ship and shuts down global trade in there? What happens if a Houthi missile strikes a massive, God forbid, a massive building and creates kind of a 9/11 type moment because of the number of players who were killed in this situation? I think it's the wild cards that are going to become more relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Ilan?
So I agree with Norman in the sense that from the Iranian regime's perspective, you're going to see much more continuity than change in terms of regional behavior. And what we need to worry about is moves by us. And I'm thinking in particular about the renewed agreement that is likely to happen that would empower the Iranian regime's worst impulses. But I like to end all these panels on a positive note. So let me offer a thought about a glass half full rather than half empty. And it's that, having just been in the region, having been in Bahrain and in the Emirates and in Israel, it's very clear that there are two macro geopolitical trend lines that are coalescing. There's the sort of the lash up, the economic dynamism, the diplomatic interaction that was fostered by the Abraham Accords that's continuing. Parenthetically, right, the United States is unfortunately not playing nearly as large or as prominent a role in this dynamic now as it could, but it's continuing, it's self-sustaining. And there's a second trend, a rejectionist trend, right? One that's sort of built around Iran, that's built around Hezbollah, Iranian proxies, and elements in the region that don't benefit from this greater connectivity among the Abraham Accords countries. So for us, looking from Europe or looking from the United States, I think the smartest strategy on a macro level is to try to foster, strengthen, empower the former, and do things that diminish the salience of the latter.
That's a great positive note to end on. Eran, let me give you the last word, sir.
Well, perhaps counter to the instincts of someone who served in military intelligence for a long time, let me also be slightly optimistic. We're not paid to be optimistic, but I have seen things happen that were actually positive in my time. And I would point to two, well, bittersweet reflections. One is that given what the world learned within the last 2 weeks about the cost of making the wrong assumptions about bad actors, I'm at least hoping that if there's no delusion attending the whatever happens in Vienna, if the adversarial reckoning is still there, then much can be done and should be done to build up a capacity to counter Iranian intentions in the region. And the other element is that in that equation, there may be a better chance now to work with a major regional power, namely Turkey. Our President Herzog of Israel is now visiting. The Turks are, or Erdogan is almost aggressively courting the countries which he denigrated not that long ago. This may have a lot to do with Fitch, putting Turkish bonds at junk, and his own his own political predicament, the failure of his regional agenda. But at the end of the day, it also has to do with the fact that NATO all of a sudden looms very large for Turkey in what is becoming an ever rougher neighborhood to the north. And so that provides also an opportunity to bring Turkey into the fold in an effective countering strategy, looking at Iranian behavior. They never really liked the Iranians. They knew how to work with them. But if they realign themselves with the forces of stability in the region, that could be a major gain.
That's a great point to end on. Thank you so much, everybody on the panel, and thank everybody for attending. I'm very grateful for all your contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.